MC looked back at the monster and thought that he could have just grabbed the box and run away, and they would have been detained by that big guy in the meantime. He let the hunter go and told him not to worry about him, he just couldn't watch him get killed, and then thought that it wasn't his fault that they were trying to kill him. The mage stepped aside and thanked him, and Jua became furious and exclaimed, "Why are they all frozen in place?" MC at this time began to get angry himself, and thought that it was the fault of those who tried to do this to him. Since things were going downhill, it looked like he had no choice but to try. He turned to the hunters and the system reported that the suit's effect time was 2 minutes and 17 seconds. He himself was getting very nervous and sweating, and Jua gritted her teeth and hissed that he was an idiot. They were so close to defeating the monster. Her subordinate asked what his orders were. Should he gather the archers? She replied that it wasn't worth it, they needed to gather firewood first. She thought that the key to defeating the 9th trigram was the moment of transition from the first phase to the second. It would become paralyzed for a short time just like this. All they could do was throw the victim into its fiery core, and it would be over. Suddenly, her subordinate excitedly told her to look at it. She turned her gaze to the monster and saw the stranger in the helmet suddenly rise into the air and appear above the monster's head. Hajuan looked at him carefully and seeing the pointer above his head, he thought, is there a depression in his head? This is probably his weak spot. Clenching his hand into a fist, he aimed there and with a loud cry, MC rushed forward, after which he delivered a powerful blow to the head, and Jua trembled with anger and exclaimed, "What is this idiot doing there? Is he trying to wake up the 9th trigram?" She got worried and ordered the others to stop him. Let them shoot him, do anything, she doesn't care, but the main thing is to stop him. The archers immediately aimed at the monster's head, and then released arrows. Hajuan at this time continued to hit the head. There was 1 minute 30 seconds left before the end of his suit's action time. Suddenly the system notified of danger, and without thinking he abruptly jumped back to the side, and seeing how an arrow flies past his head, he thought in surprise, do they really want to kill him? The guild master's subordinate turned to her, and exclaimed that he was dodging the shot, after which someone exclaimed that he was an idiot. Does he have eyes in the back of his head? MC at this time continued to frantically dodge the arrows, and one of them hit the monster right in the eye, but he did not react in any way. The man became very nervous and took out his sword, exclaiming, should they get up and hit him now? He ordered the hunters to attack and they rushed towards the monster with a loud cry, and Hajuan meanwhile exclaimed, why are they so stubborn? They fired so many arrows that this golem seemed to have hair. Suddenly he felt a tremor and was surprised, and Jua dropped her fan from her hands from shock and said that they were finished. Powerful streams of flame began to burst out of the monster's core, and she said that the second phase was complete. Feeling the heat, MC jumped back and screamed loudly, and the hunters below froze in place, nervously looking at the monster. A second later, it raised its leg above them, and then crushed the hunters at once. Seeing this, the man became very excited and exclaimed that the monster killed everyone. What should they do now? Jua remained silent and froze in horror, thinking that they could not do anything. Her gaze became empty, and when the monster reached out to her with his hand, she thought that they would all be turned into ashes. At that moment, Hajuan's loud scream was heard again. He continued to strike and this made Jua surprised and she thought, is he still alive? Despite the heat, MC continued to strike, because the suit's duration was running out. Putting all his effort, he screamed loudly, and at the moment when 5 seconds were left, he swung his fist, after which he delivered a powerful blow and mentally told the monster to break. The time ran out and a powerful explosion was heard near the monster's head and pieces of its body flew around, raising dust. Doyeon, who was already nearby, froze in place and cursed in surprise, then looked at the broken monster and asked, did he defeat the dungeon boss alone? And this simple courier was able to do it. He remembered how he punched him and smiled slightly, feeling affection due to the fact that they had a similar fighting style. After that, he jumped down from the cliff with the thought that he never thought that he would meet the courier here. He will bring him to the Yun 1 guild today no matter what. With this thought, he headed to the battlefield, and the members of the Black Dragon Guild were covered in a cloud of dust. Jua cleared her throat and said that she never would have thought that this loser would be able to defeat the 9th trigram. Her subordinate approached her and asked what they should do next, and she said that as soon as the dust settled, they should immediately grab him. He clearly spent a lot of effort to defeat the monster. Even if he is an unregistered high-ranking hunter, they will grab him without difficulty. He will answer for interfering with the raid of the Black Dragon Guild. She wants to see the one who so brazenly took their monster. Before she could finish speaking, something suddenly landed in front of them with a crash. It was Doyon. He looked up at the guild master and asked displeasedly how they were doing here. Seeing him, they were very surprised, and he flexed his fists and said that he was wondering what those scoundrels were up to. So they lured a newbie into their guild to sacrifice him to the golem? Jua became flustered, wondering how he knew they were here. After that, she ordered everyone to prepare for battle and pointed her finger at Doyon, saying that their enemy was Ha Doyon from the Yunwon Guild, so they should be careful of him. The hunters immediately came forward and he became nervous, thinking that he appeared in front of them with such pathos. But there were many more of them than he thought. He began to wander his gaze around and wondered where the courier was. He must be nearby. Suddenly, one of the subordinates ran up to the guild leader, reporting that they had a problem, and she exclaimed, "What's going on again?" He replied that the man in the helmet had disappeared. This news made her surprised, after which she repeated in shock, "He disappeared? Where could he have disappeared after such an explosion?" Doyon sighed, realizing that his plan was in vain and, looking at the crowd of hunters in front of him, thought that he had only gotten involved in this in vain. Meanwhile, Hajiun was heading to the customer under the effect of the invisibility cloak. He sighed heavily, saying that he thought this was his last adventure. He almost woke up on Olympus, but not because he successfully completed the delivery. Although no, probably if he died, he would have ended up in a completely different heavenly kingdom. What was wrong with him? Why did he have to rush off and help this guy? He was not even a hunter. He would not repeat this mistake again. He suddenly saw the dungeon barrier collapse and the houses of the city were visible in the hole, and thought, "Is this Mount Sungju? Did the dungeon disappear because he killed the boss?" The gates, which had not been defended for a long time, materialized into the dense world in the form of dungeons, so there was always the opportunity to enter them again and again. However, passes to the dungeons were only given to carefully checked hunters or with the help of connections. But this time, the dungeon was cleared not even by a hunter, and even more so, an unregistered one, but by an ordinary courier. He hopes this will not cause a backlash. He suddenly wondered what he had just risked his life for, and then looked at the huge mountain in front of him, and remembered the order. He drove up to his client, and he said that he was back. He thought he would cope faster. MC burst into tears and exclaimed that if he knew what he had to go through, he would not have said that. Sun Wukong, sincerely not understanding what was going on, asked him to calm down and tell him. He replied that he had told him that what he was looking for was just a pile of scrap metal. But the pile of scrap metal turned out to be a huge robot golem whose top could pierce the sky. And he hadn't even started telling about his laser beam, which almost burned him to ashes. The Monkey King exclaimed in surprise that it was impossible. Had the 9th trigram gone mad? Was he sure he hadn't provoked it without even knowing it? The 9th trigram doesn't tend to move at all unless provoked. MC was surprised and thought, what does that mean? If those people from the Black Dragon Guild hadn't come there, then he wouldn't have had to go through all this horror. He got really angry and thought maybe he should teach them a lesson. He could have wiped them all out with one blow. He turned to the forest and gritted his teeth, thinking, how dare they interfere with his work? Sun Wukong sighed in disappointment, and said that it seemed that he was saying all this because he still couldn't get his box. He was sure that with the trigram rage it was impossible. Hajuin calmly replied that he brought it, and the Monkey King asked in surprise how he did it. He went to the moped and opened his bag, answering that it had broken his head and that was it. After that, he took the box out of the bag and brought it to the customer, but did not rush to give it to him and asked what was inside. It looked like a metal box, like those used in Chinese restaurants. Sun Wukong suddenly let out a chuckle, and then laughed out loud and exclaimed that it was so funny. In the sky, he almost killed this monster, but now he was finished off single-handed by a completely ordinary mortal. What is his name? MC told him his name in confusion, and Sun Wukong pulled his hand out from under the ground and extended it to the box, after which something suddenly pierced the bottom of it, causing Hajuin to be surprised. After that, there was a roar and fragments of stones and earth flew in all directions, and a depression from the impact remained on the rock. MC fell to the ground in surprise and exclaimed, "What is this?" It seems he saw a staff fall out of the box. Turning his gaze to his customer, he was very surprised and fell silent, and Sun Wukong, taking his staff, said that he was his debtor. If he had not agreed to help, he would have waited for Sanzan for a long time. Who knows how many more years he would have been stuck on this mountain. Hajuin realized that he had a golden staff in his hand, and the Monkey King whistled in the meantime, after which a cloud appeared under his feet, and he wondered if maybe he should get out of here already before the Jade Emperor found out. He rose sharply into the air and said goodbye to Hajuin, saying that if fate brings them together again, they will meet again. The MC stood up and asked him to wait, and then extended his hand towards him and said that he didn't care that he was leaving, but he didn't pay him. A second later, a bag fell on his face and Sun Wukong, calling him a foolish youth, said that he, a great prophet and equal to the Celestials, was alien to pettiness. He had already paid him, and in this bag was a small reward for his efforts. The MC took the bag with a smile, wondering what was in it, and the Monkey King finally said goodbye to him and Hajuin asked him to wait, asking, is he not even entitled to a tip? Seeing that there was no trace left of him, he was left confused, and then looked into the bag and asked, does he really think this is a normal tip? After a while, he was already at home and eating noodles, and the TV reported breaking news. Yesterday afternoon, shocking reports surfaced that the Black Dragon Guild had allegedly cleared out Mount Wagwa using a special tactic to attack the boss. After chewing on his noodles, Hajuin called them idiots, and thought that it was a good thing that the Black Dragon Guild's shady dealings were exposed for everyone to see. The TV screen showed an image of the mage that MC had saved, and the host said that there were words from a rookie hunter who was present at the scene. The mage said that they had all been tricked, and that no one had warned them that they would have to fight the boss. The reporter said that there were rumors that an unknown man wearing a helmet had appeared at the scene. He confirmed her words and said that he had saved him just as he was about to be thrown into the fire pit. He was the one who had defeated the boss. Without him, they simply wouldn't have survived. MC smiled wryly and said that he thought he was finished, when he was suddenly carried forward. Fortunately, he kept his identity a secret while saving those people. Although his salary is more important. He took out his phone and saw that his current balance was 95,300 points. He earned 70,000 from this delivery, but he felt like he deserved more after the fight with the monster. But if you convert all this into real money, it will be a whopping 700 million won. With that amount of money, he can buy any house in Seoul. And he also received a special reward. He reached into his pocket, thinking that at first he didn't understand why he needed it, and then pulled out the hair of the stone monkey from Mount Wagwa, the great sage Sun Wukong. If he puts it in his palm and blows lightly, he can summon a clone of Sun Wukong for a moment. Only one use is available. Hajuin said that it was amazing that he could summon Sun Wukong himself. Lately he's been walking on eggshells a lot, facing all the monsters. Even if it's just a clone, it won't hurt. He remembered how powerful the Monkey King looked and thought it was like having a spare life. The system reported that he had a new delivery request, and he was happy, saying that it was just in time. Putting on his suit and helmet, he said with a smile that he'll have to work harder today then. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Seongjin rushed to the right room and, throwing open the doors, worriedly called out to Doeun and asked if he was okay. The beaten Doeun turned a surprised look at him, and then said that he thought he had already left for Busan yesterday. The guild master sighed in relief and confirmed his words, saying that he couldn't stay there for so long, especially considering the fact that it was his fault that he ended up there. The guy exclaimed that it wasn't his fault at all. He should have assessed the situation himself beforehand. It was his own fault. He wasn't careful enough. Seongjin gritted his teeth with a gloomy expression and thought that the idiots from the Black Dragon Guild really tried to pull a hunter from the Yunwon Guild over to their side. He shouldn't have underestimated their abilities. He should have sent Eren along with him. Next time, he would personally deal with the Black Dragon Guild. He clenched his hand into a fist in rage, and then calmed down and asked, "Is he feeling better already?" Doeun replied that the doctor said that the situation wasn't very rosy. Hearing this, the guild master became even more worried and asked, "Does he mean that his career as a hunter is in danger?" Doeun said with a smile that he was just joking. And he fell for it, right? He was told that the fracture wasn't that bad, so it wouldn't take long to recover. Did he really think that he would retire because of a couple of injuries? He laughed, and the guild leader grabbed his cheek and exclaimed that he thought now was the time for him to retire. His subordinate yelled back that he would never do that. He promised to be with him until the very end. After that, he told him everything and Seongjin asked, "So the guy on the moped defeated the boss? Did he do it himself?" Doeun confirmed his words and said that he saw it with his own eyes. He appeared out of nowhere and chopped off the thick head of that monster. He didn't even use a weapon, just a fist fight. He thinks they even look alike in some way. By the way, he heard that some of the guys were sent to Noryanjin. How did it go? Was that guy found? Seongjin replied that they checked the entire area but couldn't find him anywhere. Doyeon was surprised after his words, and the guild leader said that they tracked him on the cameras as he entered the alley, and then it was as if he had disappeared. Meanwhile, Hajuin was already on Olympus and was on his way to his order. He suddenly sneezed and exclaimed, "Is someone remembering him with an unkind word? There is always such a difference in temperature here." Soon he found himself in the abode of Hephaestus and looked inside, announcing his arrival. Seeing that he was busy, he silently sat down next to him and thought that he should wait until he finished. He yawned and thought that maybe it was because of the sudden heat, but he felt a little sleepy. Such a warm feeling reminded him of something. It was as if he was in his mother's arms again. His eyes slowly closed and his head began to fall, but suddenly Hephaestus's voice was heard above him, asking how he got here. MC opened his eyes and realized that he was hugging him. He jerked back and exclaimed, "Why did he become his mother?" The god laughed and said that he seemed tired. "Today's delivery will be quite long. Does he think he can handle it?" Hajuin stood up, leaning on a chair, and hesitantly repeated, "Long delivery?" He thought that usually they give an extra charge for such a delivery. After this thought, he agreed and said that he was ready to travel around the entire globe for a decent amount. Hephaestus was happy and said that he knew that he could be relied on, then handed him a cane and told him to take this. He had just used the heavenly steel he asked him for. The delivery needs to be done today, so he should hurry. MC said that then he should go, then carefully examined the cane with the snake head and asked where he needed to deliver it. Hephaestus answered, "To the pyramid." Upon hearing this, Hajuin was very surprised and asked if he thought it would be easier to send it by parcel. And anyway, how does the pyramid relate to Greek mythology? The god replied that he didn't know. He was so adamant. Let him not think about it that way. He winked at him and said that his services were sought after not only on Olympus. Seeing his expression, MC told him not to try to act cute, then headed towards the exit and said that he would deliver it. Let him just give him a couple of hours. As he headed towards the door, he wondered if he would be able to get to Egypt today, but suddenly Hephaestus remembered something and excitedly asked him to wait. The client he was delivering to was quite picky, so he took it upon himself to find him an assistant. MC turned around, not understanding who the assistant was. Then a girl's voice was heard next to him, greeting him. A small nymph appeared in front of him and said that she was here on Cupid's orders. Her name was Lucio. She came to serve Hephaestus. After that, Hajuin went to the order and rode on the clouds. At one point he sighed with relief, saying that he worried in vain. The pyramid is located within the mythical kingdom, so he does not have to go to Egypt. Moreover, in the clouds you do not have to hang around in traffic jams. He thinks that the delivery will be easier than easy. Suddenly, Lucio's indignant voice was heard behind him, exclaiming that she was deceived. She thought that she was going to help Hephaestus, and not ride on some man's rusty bucket. MC smiled nervously, and thought that everything would be fine if only this fool had not tagged along with him. He exclaimed, "Can she shut up? She talks too much." Lucio, who was sitting on the box of the moped, started kicking him in the head and in response told him not to call her short. For a nymph she was very tall. Hajuin began to get very angry and thought, why did Hephaestus assign this annoying child to him? An hour ago, when she just introduced herself, he looked at her proud face with bewilderment and remained silent, and the god asked, does he think she will not be useful to him? He turned around and asked, is she really his assistant? Lucio told him to watch his manners, let him not look down on her just because she is a nymph. Hephaestus told Hajuin that it is not that he does not trust him, but he cannot deny that he is not that good at mythology. But she is very knowledgeable about everything. He thinks she will be very helpful. So he does not have to worry about anything. MC turned back to the nymph and came back from the memories, and his little assistant picked her nose and said that she was so bored. Why did she have to do all this to help a stupid man? She kicked him in the head and asked how much longer he had to go. Was he really ignoring her? Hajuin remained silent and thought that she was so stubborn, then turned to her with displeasure and said that if she did not want him to leave her with the delivery, she should sit quietly and not distract him. He would tell Hephaestus that she had completed her task. She exclaimed in response, is he trying to tarnish her honor? When she was studying at Ditchwater High School, she skipped 2 grades, then she continued her studies at the prestigious Streamwater University. She became an elite nymph, like a prophecy that descended into the world. She wanted to say something else, but suddenly a candy flew into her mouth and she exclaimed, what is this? He called her an idiot in a displeased voice and said that it was just a candy. He would give her more if she sat quietly, so she should not say any more. She silently began to suck on the candy, and her eyes lit up with delight at the thought that it tasted divine. It was as if angels were dancing in her mouth. She turned to the man and said that she hoped he was not lying, that he would give her more. He told her not to worry, he always keeps his word. After that, they finally drove on in silence, and he thought that he knew it all along, that the way to a child's heart is through his stomach. Now he can finally concentrate on the road. The system reported that there were 800 meters left to the destination. Let him follow the route. They found themselves in the middle of the desert, and in a cloud of sand ahead, someone's two glowing eyes appeared. From this sight, Hajun screamed in fear and exclaimed, "What the hell is this?" He braked sharply, and the unknown creature continued to look at them. MC hesitated to go further, and Lucio suddenly called out to him, smiling, saying that as she had promised, she had been sitting quietly. Now let him give her some candy. Hajun got angry and thought that he would so like to hit her on the head. Jumping off his moped, he grabbed her and exclaimed, "Why didn't she warn him about the danger ahead?" She waved her arms and shouted that he himself had told her to be quiet. Suddenly a voice was heard, calling them the named guests. A huge sphinx in front of them said that if they wished to pass, then let them solve his riddle. MC let go of Lucio and she took off, exclaiming, "Is this a sphinx? This terrible monster asks riddles to everyone who comes close and devours whole those who answer incorrectly." The sphinx is a relative of Typhon, the beast that once defeated Zeus and almost destroyed Olympus. Hajun thought that of course the sphinx wasn't that strong, but he wasn't a legendary hero either, so he shouldn't go against him with just a nymph. Realizing this, he froze in place and immediately thought that he had a feeling like he was going to his death. His gut instinct told him that blows were useless against him, but there was no time to think. He took out his phone and checked the time available for delivery, then sighed and did a good stretch, saying that he hoped he would be paid enough. He walked forward and the nymph exclaimed, "Where is he going?" He flexed his fists and asked with a smile, and she didn't get it? He was going to solve his riddle. She got worried and said that he would swallow him if he got it wrong. He would die in his churning stomach. She grabbed his hand, trying to pull him back, and he told her not to worry, he would not die. He was not that stupid, everyone knew his riddle. They came closer to Sphinx and Lucio said that it was creepy, and MC thought that this riddle was so popular that it was simply impossible to get it wrong. Although he understands that he will definitely not solve other riddles. In this case, he has a lock of Sun Wukong with him. What if something goes wrong? Sphinx asked, "Is he ready to solve the riddle?" He threw up his hands and exclaimed that he didn't have much time, so he should be faster. Lucio burst into tears and exclaimed that he had really accepted the riddle. Guess or die. She, Lucio, the incredible nymph, would solve the riddle in any way. Upon hearing the answer, the Sphinx smiled and said that was great. Now he would ask him a riddle. Hajun thought that the answer was obvious: a man who walks on 4 legs in the morning, on 2 in the afternoon, and on 3 in the evening? This riddle had been shown on TV so many times that he remembered it all perfectly. He would solve the riddle before he could even finish speaking. But contrary to his expectations, the Sphinx asked, "What sound does a duck make when it falls?" MC was about to give the answer, but suddenly fell silent, realizing that this was a completely different riddle. The Sphinx looked at him expectantly and Hajun repeated in bewilderment, "A duck?" Lucio became flustered and started listing the sounds ducks make, then cried out with tears in her eyes that she didn't know the answer. She was sorry she couldn't help. She didn't want to be eaten. Meanwhile, her image appeared in the crystal ball that the recipient of the cane was using to keep an eye on everything. She smiled and said that the two were very curious guests. The wind in the desert picked up and the Sphinx told them to name the sound a duck makes when it trips and falls. MC froze in shock and thought, what kind of riddle is this, like a stupid joke? The answer is so obvious, isn't it? Although it's not, it's the Sphinx. This question can't be that simple. The Sphinx smiled and said that he had 3 minutes to solve the riddle, and MC, looking at his expression, thought that he had overestimated him. Meanwhile, Lucio burst into tears even more and exclaimed that it was true what they said, that these riddles were impossible to solve. Even she, an elite nymph, had no idea. She turned her gaze to Hajun and thought that now this Sphinx would eat her, and all because of this stupid little man. She remembered moments from her past. She turned to the professor and asked, "Are the riddles of the Sphinx really that difficult?" He replied that she herself could guess. Before Oedipus managed to solve the riddle of the Sphinx, it had already absorbed several hundred people. She exclaimed in surprise, So even he could not solve the riddle of the Sphinx? He replied that not only he, even the dean could not. If she had the misfortune to meet the Sphinx, then she should run as fast as she could, without looking back. Remembering the words of the professor, she wiped away her tears and thought that he had warned her they would never solve this riddle. Hajun waved his hand at this time and then said that the answer was coincident. Hearing this, Lucio froze in place, and then her face became gloomy, and she loudly exclaimed, "What does he think he's doing? How could he waste their only try so ineptly? Even a complete idiot would never think of such a thing." She grabbed his shoulders and began to shake him, screaming that if he wanted to die so quickly, then he should do it when she was not around. Suddenly, the Sphinx laughed and said that this was the correct answer, making the nymph surprised. She immediately looked up at him with an angry look and exclaimed, "How can this answer be correct?" MC asked if she had never heard of absurd riddles. The Sphinx called him an alien and said that he praised him for this solution. Now he can pass. In response, Hajun gritted his teeth and asked displeasedly, "Can he finally shut up already? He already solved his stupid riddle, so let him leave him alone." These words left the Sphinx perplexed, and MC got on his moped and said that he should come up with something smarter next time. This is some kind of kindergarten. His words upset the Sphinx to tears, and Hajun, riding past him, laughed and asked if he was really crying. He sent him to hell and wiped his muzzle with his paw, saying that he just got sand in his eyes, and MC grinned. The quest with the Sphinx was successfully completed. The Sphinx named Behemoth had to be tamed like a cat. Hajun told his assistant that he was about to speed up, so let her hold on tight. She agreed and thought, how did this person even come up with such an idea? Soon they found themselves in the middle of a gorge, and MC, looking at his phone, said that they were almost there, they just needed to drive through the gorge. The nymph awkwardly called out to him, and he asked what was wrong. She apologized to him for her words and said that she was supposed to help him on the way, but all she did was judge him for being human. She did not deserve to be called an elite nymph. He smiled back and told her to stop. She had nothing to blame herself for. He had heard such things at his job as a courier sometimes that her words did not affect him at all. He felt as if it was a vacation and he was babysitting his younger cousin. Everything was fine, she should not worry. She looked at him in surprise, then thanked him, and soon they reached their destination. They drove up to a huge pyramid and came closer, and the nymph said that she had no idea that the pyramids were so huge. She could not even see the top from here. Hajun looked around for the customer, and then looked at the phone screen and thought that according to the map, he should be expected here. Lucio pointed at something with a smile and told him to look. There was something written there. He came closer and asked what it was. She replied that it said that if there was no guard, they needed to ring the bell. He asked in surprise if she could read Egyptian hieroglyphics. She confirmed his words and said that she was mega elite after all, and he pressed a button and said that it was really cool. Suddenly, a glow appeared around them, and he excitedly asked what was happening. The nymph replied that it was some kind of gravity magic, and he exclaimed that it said to ring the bell. The ground beneath their feet split and they fell down with a loud squeal, after which they landed and there was a roar. When the dust from the falling floor settled, he looked around and said that he couldn't even believe that he survived such a fall. Suddenly, a long sigh was heard behind him. He turned around and, seeing that he was lying on the nymph, exclaimed that she would have at least said that he had crushed her with himself. He stood up and, looking at the dent under her, asked did he kill her? She irritably replied that he had not killed her, after which they went forward along the corridor, lighting their way with the phone. MC sighed discontentedly and thought, so what now? It was as if he was not making a delivery, but going through some kind of quest in a dungeon. Suddenly his assistant noticed something and called out to him, and he asked discontentedly, did she mean to say that there were traps in the floor? She pointed to the wall with drawings and asked him to point the shining piece of metal there, after which he shone the phone on the wall and asked, was there something written there? Having looked closer, he realized that these were frescoes and said that it looked like people and a giant were drawn there. Lucio immediately recognized this fresco and he, noticing her surprised and worried face, asked her, what did you understand? She replied that she had heard about the evil goddess here who loved to kidnap and torture nymphs. These frescoes must have been created by her ancestors to tell about the terrible crimes against their people. Hajun once again carefully examined the pictures and thought that he personally did not see any crimes here. In fact, it looked more like a holiday. The nymph suddenly exclaimed that they say that you meet an enemy when you least expect it. On this day, she will avenge the suffering of her ancestors. MC looked at her with displeasure and said that there will be no revenge. Whoever lived in this pyramid, it is first and foremost their client. Suddenly, a woman from the fresco appeared in front of them in a blinding light. She asked, for this reason they entered the goddess's house? They both immediately turned around, and she said with a smile that they were little rude people. She glowed even brighter and asked, who of them wants revenge? This bright light blinded Hajuin, and he covered his face with his hand, thinking that he did not even see who was speaking. The nymph immediately understood who it was, after which she rushed to attack and exclaimed that her ancestors must be avenged. MC became worried and asked her to wait, thinking that she was an impulsive child. Why attack right away? The woman smiled and asked, so she is a nymph? She stretched out her hands to her, and said that she had not seen someone like her for so long. Lucio let out an exasperated sigh, and suddenly the woman hugged her and said with a smile that the nymphs were so cute. Lucio ordered her to let her go now, she was the sworn enemy of her people. Hajuin looked at them in confusion and wondered what was going on. After that the woman explained that she had invited the nymphs here a long time ago. She had arranged parties, competitions, how cute the young nymphs were. She stroked Lucio's head and said that unfortunately they were no longer with her. He looked at her in shock and asked, did all those nymphs really die like that? Did they die from suffocation in her arms? Meanwhile Lucio almost gave up the ghost, and the woman, letting her go, exclaimed that she could not stop herself. She always behaves like this when she sees something so cute. MC thought he understood now what Lucio meant by torture. Lucio started crying and said she almost killed her. A little more and she would have been on a boat crossing the river Styx. She turned to Hajuin and asked why he didn't sleep with her. He answered with a smile that he had already told her to learn to control herself. She suddenly approached him and grabbed him by the neck, exclaiming that he had told her that she was almost like a cousin to him. Why didn't he protect his sister? He called her a little thorn and asked her to stop being capricious, and the woman, laughing, said that she seemed to have not introduced herself. She is the ruler of the two richest and sunniest countries, the high priestess of all the temples of Egypt, the divine incarnation of Horus the all-powerful falcon. She is the pharaoh. But no one listened to her. MC and Lucio continued to argue and were almost about to fight, and she exclaimed in displeasure, did they at least hear anything? Hitting each other, Hajuin replied that she was the pharaoh, but he thought that the kings of Egypt were called pharaohs. Lucio called him ignorant, and said that it would be better if he kept quiet. There are two types of gods and goddesses in this world. There are those like Cupid and Hephaestus, they were born gods. There are those who achieved divinity during their lives. Like this old ant, for example. Pharaoh looked at her in bewilderment when she heard her call her, and then asked, doesn't she think it's rude to call her old? Lucio exclaimed in surprise, so she heard her? After that MC turned to Pharaoh and apologized to her, saying that they were only here because they were making a delivery. She replied with a smile that she knew. She took out a crystal ball and said that she had been watching them through it the whole way. Hajuin was very surprised to hear this, and then the cane behind his back tore the cloth that was covering it, and then fell into Pharaoh's hands, and she, after examining it, said that it was excellent. Excellent work, and the shape is perfect. She was grateful that he brought it to her. He completely lived up to his reputation. He thought, since when did he have a reputation? His eyes widened in surprise and he realized what this meant, and then with a smile on his face, he struck a dramatic pose and thanked her for using Li Hajuin's delivery service, so he asked that the payment and tip be sent to his account. Lucio, with a gloomy expression, said that he was disgusting. Is it really necessary to act like a greedy merchant at the market? Where did his self-respect go? He replied that he couldn't earn his bread with self-respect. By the way, he bought the candy she liked so much with the money he earned. At the mention of the candy, drool immediately started flowing from her mouth, and striking the same striking pose as Hajuin, she thanked Pharaoh for using Li Hajuin's delivery service. She almost called her an old ant, but immediately corrected herself. This is what a drop of capitalism does to a nymph. Pharaoh said that she was glad to see that he was friends with this cute little people, and that he shouldn't worry about the payment. She is a generous goddess, after all. As soon as she snapped her fingers, the system reported that the delivery was complete. He received payment of 50,000 points, and the same amount in tips. He looked at his balance in shock and saw 195,300 points there, thinking that in total this was 19,530,000,000 won. Lucio flew closer to him and said with a smile that she helped him, so he owes her the candy. He turned to her with a big smile on his face and said that he would buy out her entire candy store, maybe even open a candy factory. She was very happy and said that then she would get 90% of the profit. He asked if she was serious, and Pharaoh told him to just look at this little predator. Now, when they leave, they can go out through the main entrance, and not through this tunnel. MC did not understand what she meant, and she said that, of course, she was nostalgic about going down here, but she was already kind of tired of receiving couriers in the basement. He replied confusedly that he thought this was the entrance, and Lucio said that there was a bell at the entrance. It said that if there is no security, then you need to ring. Pharaoh replied that there has been no security there for several centuries. They can just go out through the main entrance. Hajiun looked down at the nymph and asked with displeasure, "Is this true?" Under his gaze, she felt uncomfortable and nervously said that it meant this was not the front door, after which he said that there would be no candy for her. She became upset and exclaimed that he was angry. At this point, the delivery to the pyramid was complete. MC returned back to the abode of Hephaestus and, seeing his house ahead, stopped and took off his helmet, saying that they had finally returned. He did not even know how they survived. He shook the sleeping Lucio and told her to wake up, but suddenly saliva from her mouth fell on his hand and he cried out in disgust, after which she opened her eyes and asked, "Were they already back?" He led her by the hand to the house and asked, "Can't she see?" It was already dark. She sleepily replied that she did not see anything, and he asked, maybe she would at least open her eyes then. They were already in the forge of Hephaestus. Opening her eyes and seeing the forge, she called out to him and he looked down at her, asking what was the matter. She let go of his hand and thanked him for the adventure with a smile. She was having a lot of fun. He looked at her in confusion and smiled awkwardly, asking what was wrong with her. He suddenly remembered that they had made a delivery, which meant that it was time for them to say goodbye. He paused for a second, thinking over his words, then said with a smile that it was mutual. He was also having a lot of fun with her, even though she chatted a lot. She asked with displeasure why he said that. He had ruined such a touching moment. He replied that he was telling the truth. She wouldn't deny that she chatted all the time, would she? They seemed to have warmed up to each other. After that they entered the forge and the nymph said with a grin that she would never work with him again, and he replied that it was also mutual. He thought that he didn't expect them to become friends, and Hephaestus, noticing them, called them his little stars and said that the client had nothing but rave words about them. He then thought, what if they worked in pairs? They both looked at each other and Lucio asked her to work with this little man in pairs. They both pointed their fingers at each other and exclaimed in rage that they had no reason to work together. It was better to die than to work with each other. Time passed, a new day came. Hajiun was sleeping soundly in his bed, but suddenly someone's voice distracted him from sleep. He opened one eye and saw a nymph on himself who was trying to wake him up. He suddenly stood up and shouted, "What is she doing here anyway?" She covered her ears and asked why he was yelling at her. Did he really forget that they were a team now? He looked at her with confusion and remembered that he couldn't refuse Hephaestus, who looked very upset and said that he had never asked his son for a favor, and now he had to team up with this child. He would have to get used to it. He asked why she woke him up. He was sleeping so soundly. She turned her frightened gaze to the side and said that the noise there just wouldn't stop. He wondered what kind of noise that was, after which she took out her phone, which was blowing up with notifications, and said that she was talking about this. There were a lot of notifications about new orders on his phone, and he took it, thinking that this couldn't be. He realized that these were the most ordinary orders and thought that he had worried in vain. He remembered how he was deprived of the right to work for a whole week and realized that this time had already passed. He got out of bed and she asked what was wrong. "Is everything okay?" He replied that it was nothing, that she shouldn't worry. She grabbed him by his clothes and exclaimed that she wanted to know what was going on, and he asked her not to start whining again. Suddenly his phone rang and he asked her to wait, saying that someone was calling him. Looking at the phone screen, he got nervous and realizing that the manager was calling him, he thought that he should say that he was quitting. He answered the call and the manager shouted loudly, did he not notice that he was back at work? Why the hell is he not taking orders? MC immediately took the phone away from his ears so as not to go deaf and wanted to answer him something, but the manager beat him to it and asked, did he even look how many deliveries were in the queue? His manager's name is Bei Dauman, he is 30 years old, and is going bald. He lit a cigarette, and said that he should be grateful that he didn't fire him. He was lucky that he was only suspended for a short time. And he, as he can see, hasn't learned his lesson? He should get back to work immediately, or he will fire him. Hajiun got angry and told him to get down to it, let him fire him. Dauman asked in surprise, was he completely crazy? He showed the middle finger and exclaimed, what if that is true? What will he do to him? Lucio was surprised to see an angry aura splashing around him and using her visor, said that his energy was 40 units, he was not acting like he usually does. Suddenly her visor exploded and she exclaimed that she couldn't see anything, and the manager meanwhile asked with displeasure, does he think he can find another job? He will blacklist him, and that will be the end of him. The MC replied that he was tired of these angry threats. It is no wonder that even his hair is already running off his bald head. He is tired of it, let him do what he wants. He said goodbye to him and hung up, but before that, the manager managed to ask what his hair had to do with it. Realizing that the call had ended, he looked at the phone screen and then burst into tears and said that it was a low blow. Lucio, meanwhile, worriedly asked Hajuin if he was okay, and he took a deep breath to calm down, after which he turned to her with a smile and suggested that they go get something to eat. He was glad that he finally said goodbye to this job, and meanwhile, in the Yun 1 Guild building, everyone was busy looking for him. Seongjin asked in surprise, were they unable to find him yesterday either? The captain of the third squad, Jang Seho, replied that they searched every corner, none of them could notice either the moped or the helmet. If his moped was so hard to track, maybe he realized he was being followed and changed his ID number? Seongjin sighed tiredly and thanked him for checking everything, and thought that he already had a lot of problems, let alone this guy. Seho asked if they should continue searching? He replied that they couldn't waste their energy like this. By the way, what's going on in Busan? He replied that things weren't going well. The squad of 6 A-rank hunters that was sent out to raid retreated. It looked like the portal would turn into a full-fledged dungeon in 5 days. The guild leader replied that he understood everything, and thought that a portal had appeared on Hyundai Beach a month ago. When the association contacted them, he immediately realized that clearing the dungeon wouldn't be that easy. But he didn't think that 6 hunters would be enough. An idea suddenly came to him, and he thought with a smile that he knew what to do. He turned to the captain of the third squad and ordered him to tell Eren and the first squad to start preparing to leave. Seho asked in surprise, did he want to go to Busan? Seongjin looked out the window and touched the glass, saying that it had been a while since he had gone on a business trip, after which he thought that he would show everyone again why they were considered the best guild in the country. Meanwhile, the MC was enjoying his food. After taking a sip of the broth, he put the plate on the table and said with a smile that he really wanted something spicy. He wished he could see the manager's face when he said he was quitting. The nymph exclaimed that it was so good. She had never tasted such a delicious thing. He asked her to eat more slowly and said that she would stain all her clothes, but she ignored him and said that even this soft oval thing tasted incredible. Who would have thought that there were so many delicious things in the human world? She feels like she's been wasting her entire life. He smiled and said it was just a bowl of noodles, and she continued eating and said they must be having a hard time. Meanwhile, the waiters started whispering about how it was her first time trying black bean noodles. Apparently, he was a single father. Hajuin heard their conversation and wondered what they were talking about. After they finished eating, they went outside and Lucio patted her stomach and said she felt like she was going to explode. He wiped her mouth with a handkerchief and said he told her not to eat anything. He suddenly realized that from the outside it really did look like he had a daughter, and she asked him to stop wiping her mouth, and he remembered the conversation between those waiters. One of them said, "Isn't that the guy who lives across the street? But this building only has tiny apartments, which are definitely not suitable for raising a child." He smiled wryly and thought that now everyone in the neighborhood thought he was a slacker. But since they were going to have to live together now, he should find a bigger apartment. He thoughtfully asked if they should move. She looked very happy about the news and he asked why she was so upset. She asked in response, displeased, wouldn't he be happy if he moved from some small puddle? He said that she spoke as if she had lived there her whole life. She turned around and pointed to the building and asked if they were moving, then how about this palace? He looked at the huge apartment complex in front of him and asked if she was kidding. He stretched her cheeks and exclaimed if she had any idea how much an apartment there cost. Definitely no less than 20 billion won. She asked displeasedly where all the money she helped him earn in the pyramid scheme went. He looked at his balance and smiled awkwardly, thinking that he could afford it, and then started thinking seriously about buying an apartment. After that, they went to look at the options offered. Once in one of the apartments, the nymph looked around with delight and said that it was so spacious. Are they going to live here now? MC replied that he hadn't decided yet and thought that the building was new, so he thought everything was great here. He turned to the realtor and asked him to repeat the terms again. He said that the current owners would be able to move out in 2 weeks, The payment was about 200,000 won per month. He simply couldn't find more luxurious terms. The location of the building was just great. It was not too high, schools and transportation were nearby. Let him believe it, he wouldn't regret buying it even after 20 years. Ha-Jun asked him to stop praising the place and said that it was really great here, but he would like to look at other options. The realtor agreed and said that he would show everything that was available, and MC thought that buying the first place he saw was not very smart. After that, he approached Lucio, who was looking out the window, and said that they would go look at a new place, and she got upset and asked, "So they won't live here?" He replied that he said that he hadn't decided yet. Taking her in his arms, they went out into the hallway, and she exclaimed that he was a liar. At that very moment, a girl passed by them. He paid attention to her and seeing Aaron, who was looking at him with a worried look, he realized that he knew her. After a while, putting noodles in her mouth, Lucio exclaimed that it tasted magical, and then turned her gaze to Ha-Jun and asked why he wasn't eating. At that time, he looked at the contract in shock and said that he bought a house on the very first day of searching. This, of course, is insanely cool. After a whole day of searching for an apartment, he finally settled on the building he saw first. He bought the apartment for well below market price, but something still bothers him. The girl he saw yesterday, he's sure he saw her among the hunters in the dungeon. The helmet covered half of his face, so he doesn't think she recognized him. But it still bothers him. He took his phone out of his pocket, and seeing no notifications, he asked why he wasn't receiving any new orders. Lucio asked, hadn't they already finished one? He worriedly said that 2 days had passed with nothing new, and she replied that it wasn't that much. He got upset and said that he used to get at least 1 order a day, and she looked very surprised, after which she crossed her arms over her chest and said discontentedly that excessive greed never leads to anything good. He had enough money from the last deliveries. He replied that this money was enough until yesterday. Currently, his balance is 190,700 points. That's how much he has left after paying for the apartment. 19,370,000,000 won. But with the remaining amount, it comes to 17 billion won just for the apartment. On top of that, he needs to buy new furniture and appliances, as well as pay the realtor. If you take into account all these expenses, it turns out that all his money went towards housing. Realizing this, he fell to the floor in despair. This was the mistake of a new tenant, overestimating his finances. Lucio exclaimed, "Why is the apartment so expensive? He could buy a castle in the divine world." He asked, how was he supposed to know about this? "It has always been expensive in Seoul, there's nothing he can do about it." She asked, what should they do now? He replied that he was sorry to say this, but they wouldn't be able to buy candy anymore. Hearing this, she was horrified and exclaimed that she was against it. Deciding to somehow solve the problem, she thoughtfully said that she would think of something, and he said that now she understood everything. An idea suddenly occurred to her, and she asked why he shouldn't become a promoter? He asked, should he become a door beggar? She replied that they didn't have to wait for work to come up. They could go to Hephaestus and ask him if he knew of any gods or heroes who needed deliveries. Ha-Jun immediately sat down and began to happily pat her on the head, saying that he admitted that she was very smart, maybe even a real genius. But how would they get to Olympus? She looked at him with a puzzled look and replied that it was the same as usual. He said in confusion that he teleported there when they were given an order. Hearing this, Lucio looked at him with confusion and the room fell silent. Meanwhile, the first and second squads of the Yun-Won Guild, 45 hunters in total, had gathered on the helipad. Aaron and Seongjin stepped forward and he said that he was sure they had all heard that they were heading to Hyundai Beach today to deal with the new portal. He wanted them to forget their previous failures and bring glory to the guild once again. They all agreed in unison and shouted happily, and Seongjin turned to Aaron and asked her to go. They both got into the helicopter and took off, and after she put on her headphones, the guild leader decided to ask her about what she said earlier. Is she sure that guy is her neighbor now? She replied that she couldn't find out for sure if he moved in, but he clearly visited the apartment. He asked in surprise, is that true? They searched every corner to find him, and he was right under her nose. Is she sure she saw him? She confirmed his words and he thought that it would be easy to find him now, and now he needs to focus on the portal. Aaron looked out the window and, remembering how he walked down the hallway, thought that it turned out that he was the one who defeated the boss. She hopes that she will be able to catch him in battle one day. Meanwhile, Ha-Jun showed up at the door of Hephaestus's abode and greeted him loudly, but seeing no one inside, he asked if he wasn't working today. Not even the lights were on. Lucio, who was hiding around the corner, said excitedly that she thought they should leave. What if they got divine punishment for entering without permission? He replied that they had already arrived, and that she had told him to come here anyway. She became very nervous and said with tears in her eyes that it was terribly disrespectful. He looked down at her in bewilderment, thinking that it was the little girl who had called Pharaoh an old woman. Suddenly, Hephaestus's voice was heard from behind them, exclaiming in displeasure, "Who dared to come to him so early in the morning?" Upon learning that it was them, his rage evaporated and MC called out to him in greeting, and he said that he hadn't ordered delivery. What brought him here? He made a sweet face and replied that he had a favor to ask of him. Hephaestus placed his hands on his waist waiting for him to continue, and Hajuin showed him the bag and said that they thought it would be rude for him to come empty-handed, so they brought this. The god asked in anticipation if this is what he had in mind. MC pulled out a bottle of soju from the bag and said that he remembered he liked beer, so he brought this for him to try. Hephaestus was very happy and took the bag and asked him to tell him what he wanted. MC laughed and said that he wanted to ask if he could introduce him to any gods or goddesses who might be interested in his delivery. The god frowned thoughtfully, and then said that he had someone in mind, but... He paused and Hajuin asked what was wrong. He looked away and said that he was scared, it was too dangerous. Thinking that there was nothing more dangerous than poverty, MC told him not to worry, he promised to grab any opportunity. Hephaestus replied that if he really thought he could handle it, he would teleport him now. He stretched his hand out to his side and a bright flash appeared around Hajuin, which scared him a lot, and then he asked him to wait. He didn't say who the customer was. But it was too late, he had already been teleported, and when the bright flash disappeared, he opened his eyes and realized that he was in a completely different place. Looking around, he wondered where the hell he was. He threw him out without giving any explanation. What did he even expect from him? Suddenly the system reported that danger had been detected. He immediately became wary and shuddered, and then looked to the side and realized that something dangerous was heading towards him. Turning around, he saw someone's red eye in front of him. A huge three-eyed boar was running towards him at great speed and squealing loudly. Realizing that he wouldn't be able to dodge, MC got really scared and covered his head with his hands, and then suddenly someone's hand appeared from the forest, pulling the bowstring, and then the arrow pierced the boar's head and it fell, sliding along the ground. Hajuin, who fell to the ground out of fear, turned around and asked, "What was that? Is it dead?" Suddenly the tall grass next to him rustled, and a second later Lucio appeared from there, and exclaimed that she barely made it in time. He was almost turned into a human pancake. MC called out to her, and said that he didn't know that she was following him. She replied with tears in her eyes that after he disappeared, she was also transported here. He sighed in displeasure, and thanked her for silently watching him suffer here and not even helping him. She joyfully threw up her hands and exclaimed that this was such a funny sight. The boars of Olympus are known for their ferocity, and he killed him with one blow. MC answered with a gloomy expression that it was not he who killed him. Suddenly a stranger's voice was heard from the side, saying that he did it. He came out of the bushes and said that he did not know there were people here. He threw his hands behind his head and asked with a smile, "So there is a man and a nymph here?" Hajuin turned his gaze in his direction and, seeing a centaur in front of him, cursed in his mind and exclaimed, "Who is this strange horse man?" He got to his feet and began to carefully examine him. Is he a man from above, and a horse from the waist down? Suddenly a notification came to his phone. He took it out and the system reported that he had arrived at his destination. He thought, so this strange man is his client? The centaur said that strangers do not often come here. Maybe they will tell him who they are. The nymph exclaimed in surprise that it was the chrome centaur, and then grabbed Hajuin's hand and said with a smile that she thought she knew who it was. There was Jason, the leader of the Argonauts, Achilles, the hero of the Trojan War, and the greatest warrior who led the Olympian gods to victory during the time of Gigantomania, Hercules. And this was Chiron, the mentor of all these great heroes. After her words, the centaur threateningly pulled out his bow and asked, "Did she just say the name Hercules in his presence?" He rushed forward and aimed at Hajuin, exclaiming, "Do they even know what he went through because of that idiot?" MC waved his hands and excitedly asked him to wait. He was actually silent. They were sent by Hephaestus, they came with a delivery, and not to cause him trouble. Hearing this, Chiron was surprised and hesitated, and then he started shooting at them and exclaimed, "Do they take him for a fool?" MC started to dodge, screaming loudly in fear, and then exclaimed that he was not lying. After that, they moved to Chiron's house and Hajuin told how they ended up there. The nymph confirmed his words and the centaur thought it was interesting. Hephaestus, as a rule, does not mention him in the presence of just anyone. He looked down at Hajuin and thought that he was by no means a hero. However, this nymph is with him. Even the most famous heroes can hardly boast of friendship with nymphs, especially for them to be their companions on their travels. At this time, MC whispered, "Why is this man so suspicious? They have already explained everything, why does he not believe them?" Lucio replied that she does not know either, they say about him that he has a vulnerable soul. After thinking for a while, Chiron said that he decided that he believed them. They were very happy and exclaimed that he really was the wisest of sages. He asked, so the two of them could get him anything he wanted? Hajuin rose from his knees and awkwardly scratched the back of his head, answering that not literally everything, but a lot. Thinking that he needed to test him, Chiron took out a jar and told them to go through the forest to the north, where they would find a giant cave. Let them collect the saliva of the lazy oaf who slept there for him. After saying this, he threw the jar and MC, catching it, thought in surprise, did he want him to collect his saliva in a jar and bring it to him? He gave the candy to Lucio and asked, he hopes that the saliva does not have to be literally collected from this man's mouth, right? Chiron began to get angry and replied that they needed to do just that. Does he have any objections? Hajuin thought that this was, of course, an absolutely unthinkable violation of another person's personal space, but that was no reason to refuse the order. Grabbing the nymph, he laughed nervously and said that he should think that he already had the jar of saliva. After that, they ran out of the house and Chiron, looking after them, said that he was a pathetic fool. He did not even bother to ask what dangers awaited him on this path. He left the house and thought that this was an easy test that would show whether he was worth trusting. Even if he miraculously got out of this forest alive, then he would have to cross rocky snow-capped mountains, through which no man could pass. If he is an empty talker, one look at these mountains will make him give up. MC at this time prepared for a dash, and then jumped high and headed towards the destination. Seeing this, the centaur was very surprised. In fact, Hajuin used the racing suit skill called super jump, one-time use 1 minute. The nymph in his hand screamed in fear, and the system reported that the remaining use time of the suit is 1 minute 50 seconds. Continuing on, Hajuin thought that he had already gotten used to this suit. At this speed they would soon reach this cave. When they reached a huge cliff, he began to jump up, and then landed at the very top and uncertainly looked ahead, seeing the entrance to the cave in front of him. The destination has been reached. The system reported that the racing suit is disabled, the reboot time is 32 seconds. He thought with annoyance that he had used the suit's functionality too mercilessly, and Lucio sank to the ground and said that she was dizzy. He asked if she was really sick. Since they were already here, they needed to get some saliva. Lucio agreed with him and they both went into the cave, lighting their way. After a while, MC thought that they had already descended deep, but he did not see anyone sleeping here. Seeing that Lucio was clutching his shoulder and shaking with fear, he grinned and asked if she was scared. She smiled nervously and replied that fear was not typical of mega-elites. Suddenly, she noticed something ahead and screamed very loudly, and Hajuin displeasedly told her not to scream so suddenly, she was confusing him. What was she scared of? It was just a couple of drops falling from the ceiling. He thought she saw a monster. He didn't notice how something flashed behind him and he, hearing a barely perceptible sound, slowly turned his gaze to the side and nervously asked what was that. As soon as he turned around, he saw 5 heads of monstrous snakes in front of him at once and froze in horror, and then smiled and said that it looks like he won't have to worry about the lack of saliva. Meanwhile, Chiron walked behind them and sighed heavily from the pain in his leg. Very tired, he called Hajuin a bastard and wondered where he went. He thought he was an ordinary person, but he didn't know that he was hiding such abilities. And yet he is only a person. Even with abilities, he can't climb the mountain. Looking behind the rock, he saw something that surprised him greatly. Ahead, there was a depression in the ground from the impact and he, not believing his eyes, asked what the hell was this. Did he really go to the cave? Having given his body strength, he exclaimed that he must be crazy, after which an aura appeared around him and he moved forward, but suddenly his leg was pierced by a sharp pain and he let out a painful sigh. Despite this, he rushed forward with the thought that he cannot enter the cave, because there is an immortal monster there. At this time, MC froze in place and smiled, and then tears gushed from his eyes and he cursed quietly. Turning around abruptly, he grabbed the nymph and ran back, shouting that this is a terrible monster. But the monster did not rush after them, and MC, who was hiding behind a high stone, turned around and said that it seemed to be sleeping now. The nymph asked in fear, "How is this possible?" "A huge snake with several heads, this is the Hydra monster." Hajuin turned his surprised gaze to her, and she exclaimed, "What did Chiron entrust to him?" He spread his hands to the side and asked, "How should he know? Who knew that they would have to extract the saliva of this monster?" He looked out from behind the rock and nervously clenched his teeth, thinking that they had to get into such a mess. With the Hades helmet, he could still do something, but he had to go without it. Suddenly, a system window with a hint appeared in front of him. In an emergency, he can use the warp service. For only 5,000 points, the system will transfer the goods he purchased to where he is now. Seeing the price, he got really angry and mentally exclaimed, 50 million won just for transferring goods? He bought the Hades helmet for 800 points. This is a brazen robbery. Although now he has no choice. He pressed the buy button, and at the moment when 5,000 were written off from him, the helmet appeared in his hands, and the system reported that he currently has 188,700 points. Lucio said in surprise that a helmet had just fallen from the sky, and he started crying and said that it was his hard-earned 50 million won. Putting on the helmet, he told Hydra that she was finished, after which he came out of hiding, and the nymph exclaimed worriedly, "What is he doing? The entrance is on the wrong side." Nervously rubbing his nose, he replied that he knows this, and she asked, "Is he crazy?" This is Hydra itself. This huge monster, the daughter of Typhon. Even the gods of Olympus are afraid of her deadly poison. He looked up at the monster and thought, so this scum is a daughter? It seems that this Typhon was scattering his seed everywhere. Lucio grabbed his hand and pulled him in the other direction. They say that now is not the time for jokes. This time everything is different, not like with that Sphinx. He pulled his hand out of her grip and said that it was okay, he could handle it, and that she should go to the entrance for now. She called out to him worriedly, and was silent for a second, after which she turned around abruptly, and exclaimed that he was a real fool and a dumbass. Let the deadly poison melt him to the bone. She flew to the exit, and he said in confusion that she could have left beautifully, but at the end she left only curses. He turned back to Hydra and thought that now he needed to start making the delivery. Confidently squeezing the can in his hands, he headed towards Hydra, and at that moment one of the heads dropped to the floor. He said that she could have slept normally, otherwise she opened her eyes, completely confusing him. Taking the lid off the can, he came closer to Hydra's open mouth, after which he began to drool with disgust and thought that he better not touch this, otherwise something terrible will happen. Why did they even tell him to get this? After filling the jar halfway, he said that he hoped it would be enough. Let him just try to give him a small tip for the delivery. Suddenly everything in the cave began to shake. He became very worried and began to look around, wondering what was going on. Was the ceiling collapsing? At that very moment several stones fell from the ceiling and he screamed loudly, and when it was all over, he asked if it was an earthquake. He suddenly realized that he had nothing left in his hands and, looking down at the floor, saw a broken jar there and cursed loudly. He himself did not notice how he leaned on the Hydra's head with his hand and accidentally touched her eyes, and said that without the jar he would not be able to collect saliva. Hearing some sounds, he turned his gaze to the monster, and seeing that the gaze of all heads was directed straight at him, he recoiled in horror and cursed loudly with the thought that she had woken up. He suddenly remembered that he was wearing a helmet, and immediately closed his mouth, thinking that he just needed to hide the fact that he was there. Suddenly the Hydra asked who he was. He was very scared, and all the Hydra heads surrounded him. She said that she could smell the ghosts of hell with their skin torn off. Was he sent from the abyss? He thought in surprise. Did she smell him? The Hydra laughed, and said that he shouldn't be so afraid. This wonderful helmet that hides him belongs to Hades, right? He cursed in his mind and thought, so she can see right through him? She asked, so why did he come to her? He also went so far, swam across the river Styx. He answered in his mind that he came for her saliva and cried, thinking that if he said so, she would immediately kill him. One of the snakeheads asked, is it really possible to swim across the river Styx? The other head of Hydra called her an idiot, and said that Hades sent him. The two heads started arguing, and one of them asked, did she want to die? The other head exclaimed, what kind of low level is this? Among their curses, Hydra's voice was heard, asking why he was silent. MC got nervous and she said that she hoped he woke her up not because of some nonsense. She wanted to say what the consequences of this would be, but he did not let her finish and, abruptly taking off his helmet, smiled nervously and said that he came to say hello from the abyss. He cursed mentally, thinking that he was at a dead end, and Hydra remained perplexed, after which she covered her mouth with her hand in surprise and asked, "So Cerberus sent him?" He nervously confirmed her words and waved his hands, saying that it looked like he hadn't been able to contact her lately. So he asked him to say hello to her. She came out of the shadows and asked, "So this kid is interested in how his older sister is doing?" She has lived for so many millennia and this is the first time she sees something like this. He trembled in fear when he saw her approaching, and she came out to him in human form and asked with a smile, "How is he doing?" Not bad for him as a guard. MC was very surprised that she was his older sister, and meanwhile Lucio was flying among the mountains and shouting that Hajuin was such a fool. Even he can handle Hydra, it's a real suicide. She should go down and ask for help. While she was flying, she suddenly bumped into Chiron, who asked, "What's wrong? Why is she the only one here?" She called out to him in surprise, then started crying and said that Hajuin had just gone to Hydra. The centaur tiredly covered his face with his hand and said that it meant he had finally reached her. She exclaimed that they needed to help him quickly, and he replied that even he, a demigod, couldn't handle her. Her face darkened and she said in horror that this couldn't be true, and he frowned and thought that he should have sent him back. After thinking for a bit, he sighed, then enveloped his body in aura and told her to show him the way. His leg trembled in pain and Lucio said his name in surprise, and he flexed his fists and clenched his teeth, saying that he couldn't let the young man die because of him. Meanwhile, in the cave, MC froze in surprise and then asked, "Hydra in human form?" She stroked one of the snake's heads and laughed, saying that it seemed surprised by her appearance. After she was sealed here, she can no longer return to her true form. Even her brother has never seen her like this, so he doesn't know. He thought she was talking about Cerberus? What's up with their genealogy? Hydra smiled and asked how her younger brother was doing. She couldn't contact him, so she was very worried. He smiled nervously and asked what the point of these unnecessary words was. He eats 3 times a day and gets paid. He is very happy with his profession. He remembered how Persephone played with him like a dog and thought that they had him there as a pet. After his words, Hydra smiled and said that she was glad to hear it. He nervously waved his hand and said that since he had given her everything, it was time for him to go. He thought that if he stayed here, he might get caught in a lie, but suddenly Hydra told him to wait. Her eyes lit up and some kind of fog enveloped him, and she said that since he came at her brother's request, she can't just let him go. What will happen to her reputation? Hajun's legs trembled and he realized that he couldn't move, after which he nervously turned to her and asked, "What kind of reputation?" She licked her lips and told him not to refuse, after which she turned her back to him and told him to take it. In the middle of her back, there is a scale that is different in color. He can pull it out and take it for himself. He thought in confusion, is she suddenly asking him to rip out her scales? She told him not to be afraid, her scales contain dangerous power, it will be useful to him. MC suddenly remembered the monkey hair and thought, is this some kind of object, like Sun Wukong's hair? Then he has no reason to refuse. He approached her with a smile and laughed, saying that he would do it, and then tried to pull it out, but he still couldn't, and he thought, what's the matter? Did she do it on purpose? He gritted his teeth and activated the racer suit, after which he pulled the scale out of her back, but due to